Hello, I'm Chuck Martin, and welcome to the Voices of the Internet of Things. With me today is Jeff Finn, CEO of Zvelo, a company that provides security services for the industry. Jeff has been CEO of eSoft, Senior Vice President of Evolving Systems, and founder and Senior Executive at Prairie Systems. At Zvelo, Jeff focuses on leading a team that deals with Internet of Things security, ad fraud detection, and content categorization. Welcome here, Jeff.
Hello, thank you.
So I've been dying to talk about security because every time we talk to anybody on this program, they mention security in passing, but you're actually dealing with it. Can you give me a kind of a rundown of the state of the industry today in terms of the state of the market, especially as it relates to security around IoT?
Sure, happy to, and thanks again for the invitation. So what we've been seeing happen in the marketplace, you're seeing just an incredible amount of innovation, new technology coming onto the market that's leveraging robotics, leveraging AI and machine learning, and the new products that are coming online are just, they're mind blowing. You go to CES this year, and it was all about web connected devices. Everything was web connected. That was the underlying story behind basically every product there. And what we're seeing, though, is that a lot of the products that are being designed and developed really are not focused on any elements of security. They're doing a great job of how do they make something easy to use, easy to deploy, to increase market adoption, to get a price point lowered so they can increase their market share. All of those things are great. What's happening, though, is a lot of that is taking place at the expense of security. So if I'm trying to design the next new IoT device, get it on the shelves at some consumer electronics place or home goods store, I am probably not going to put a lot of time and energy and investment into a processor, a chip, flash memory, whatnot, as well as security design considerations. Because all those things do is add to my cost. They add to making it a little bit more difficult user experience. And so what's happening, you're seeing these devices that are getting deployed by the millions, the tens of millions, all the projections are by the billions as we go forward. And what you're ending up with is what we're referring to as a perfect storm for the cyber hackers of the world. You have enormous numbers of web-connected devices that are being deployed where there's virtually no security. So from a hacker standpoint, this is great. I have the ability to scan the internet. I can identify all these devices that are connected. I can very quickly compromise those. And depending on the device, depending on the replacement cost, my motivation may be oriented towards ransomware, if it's a real high replacement cost type of web-connected device. If it's a lower cost device, a light bulb, doorknobs, thermostats, toasters, whatnot, people aren't going to play the ransomware game. Instead, as a hacker, what I'm doing is I'm looking at those as basically compromising them and enlisting them in my botnet army. And that's where I can very easily and inexpensively build up an army of bots for things like DDoS attacks, use them for spam and whatnot. So what we're seeing emerge is a very rapidly growing, what we're calling security gap around all these IoT devices.
So is it primarily because the security is not being built into the device, or the consumer doesn't have enough knowledge to empower it when they get it?
Great question. I think it's a combination of things. One is, in many cases, the devices aren't being designed with security in mind. In many cases, at best, it's an afterthought. Second, you have many consumers, and I'm talking primarily about the residential, the smart home, the small business environment. People aren't aware of how these devices work. They know they have something on their smartphone where they have an app that can control the light bulbs in their house, but they really don't give much consideration at all to the fact that, hey, these devices are connected to the internet. They don't have security. They can be hacked. Yeah, they can still be acting as a thermostat or a light bulb or a door knock, but at this point in time, there's such little awareness on the part of the owners of these devices, the consumers of these devices, as the risks that are being posed by putting them into their homes and businesses.
So is there a difference by companies who make this, like the big companies, the mega brands versus smaller companies that are producing something offshore somewhere, or is it pretty much across the board?
We've seen it pretty much across the board. So it doesn't matter if it's a device being manufactured in the U.S. and Europe and Asia and China. There are certain price points that devices need to hit to be able to be put on the shelves and get people walking in stores and buying those devices. And for that reason, in many cases, security just is not a design consideration.
But the companies like Samsung, LG, GE, name your big brand, aren't they aware of this?
Yeah, I think there's awareness of it by the manufacturers, but until the market forces them to change their mindset, then the device manufacturers, the vendors, are not going to be required to do anything different than they're doing today. And right now, the market is, in many cases, not even aware of the risks that these devices pose, so they're not going to change their buying behaviors.
So what has to happen?
Well, we look at it in many ways very similar to what happened in the late 90s with PCs. So if you flash back in time, for those folks that are listening that are old enough to remember, in the mid to late 90s, you started seeing broadband connection prices come down. And so people that had computers that maybe had been on a dial-up prior to that point in time, now they had a dedicated, always-on connection. Well, if you're always connected to the internet, that means anybody on the internet is, in theory, always connected to you. That brought about a number of different types of exploits and attacks. It really created what started off as a cottage industry for antivirus, anti-malware, and that industry has now grown obviously into billions and billions of dollars of revenue a year since that point in time. But if you go back to that point in time, that era, and think about it, it really took a series of headline grabbing news articles where one attack after another got in the headlines. It started creating an awareness in the buying public that said, hey, I better do something about this. I better protect myself, my computers, or my network. And that really gave rise to the world of the antivirus vendors. I think something like that will likely unfold and be part of the factors that drives people to really paying attention to the risks that these devices pose and forcing the vendors to do something about security.
So from a consumer standpoint, if someone is basically going through their devices, but it's not it's not stopping them from turning the lights on and off, does it matter to them at all?
Well, today it doesn't matter. But what you're going to see happening, who it matters to, are the folks where those devices are being weaponized and where those devices are being pointed in the way of targets. So if you are an e-commerce site and all of a sudden you are being subjected to a massive DDoS attack, you darn sure want to figure out a way to stop that attack. You are going to turn to carriers, service providers, ISPs, and put pressure on them to say, look, you need to shut this traffic down. So where we think one possibility of where this might go is those service providers, your cable companies, your ISP, your telco, they are going to have to put in place the tools that are going to allow them to identify what devices are compromised, where all this DDoS or malicious traffic is coming from, and start shutting down those devices at the source. That's when the consumer may start A, becoming aware, and B, start caring. Because if all of a sudden their light bulb can't work or their thermostat can't work, they are going to start trying to figure out why and hopefully, ideally, start taking some steps to pay attention to security, buy products that have built-in security, or where they can manage the security profiles.
But right now, a consumer, unless they've got a Comcast or Verizon, whatever, something goes down like that, they don't even have someone to call.
Exactly. No, and that it's a great point. It's also why we think there's a tremendous new service opportunity, new revenue opportunity, if you will, for telcos, for the ISPs, an extension of what some of the MSSPs are doing today, where they can get into doing that home network monitoring or that small business network monitoring. Because right now, as you just said, the owners of those devices, they don't know. In many cases, they don't care. there's really little or no motivation for them to change anything they're doing today.
Do you find it somewhat ironic that smart security systems can be compromised?
Yeah, it's it is interesting. And if you pick any number from any of the different companies that are doing projections of these devices, you're talking about an environment where there will be tens of millions or tens of billions or 100 billion or more devices that are being deployed with little or no security. So it is, we think, are some significant attacks that are just waiting to be unleashed on what is today a really unaware and unsuspecting public.
So where does this start? Is it going to be headlines, disaster things?
Well, we've seen a few of those over the last year. We've seen some places, some incidents where IoT devices are being compromised. Hackers are weaponizing those, and this could be a hacker. It could be a government affiliated entity with some bad actors, a bad state actor, who can take these devices and without a huge amount of work, point them towards attacks on the infrastructure of a country. Could be air traffic control, could be the banking system, could be the telecom system. So the potential certainly exists today to do some really, really significant damage to the infrastructure of any country or many countries.
So from a business standpoint, are businesses in general pretty secure these days?
I would say no. I would say that really businesses, small business, large biz, consumers, smart homes, really there's very little awareness, very little security in place to deal with, again, what we're calling the security gap.
But everybody we talk to, they all, I mean, if you go to any conference, as you know, they always mention security.
Yep. And security is something that it does get mentioned, but it's certainly not the focus of what is being designed and built out there today.
So it's like AI, like every company says they have AI, but they really don't?
Well, there's some pretty fascinating things taking place with AI. And unfortunately, hackers also have access to things like AI, machine learning, and data science. And now you give them access to tens of billions of basically web-connected devices that they can use for whatever purpose they want. That's a pretty scary combination.
So for these connected devices at the home, can more than one hacking entity be using that device?
They could, although what we've seen in many cases is some of these devices will be hacked. Really sophisticated hackers will then install their own version of some type of antivirus or anti-hacking capability on it to prevent it from being hacked by yet another hacker.
God, that sounds like spy versus spy versus spy.
It does. It ends up turning into that. So essentially, I mean, once a hacker is able to compromise the device, the last thing they want to do is have that then get recompromised or rehacked by yet somebody else.
So they're kind of protecting it?
Yeah, I mean, they're quite happy to say, hey, I'll let you keep, let the thermostat keep doing what it's designed to do, regulating temperature. I'll let the light bulb keep working, the toaster keep burning your toast. And meanwhile, I am just sitting here just using your bandwidth, your cycles, using this device all day long for whatever purpose I have in mind.
But it looks like then there's nothing visible from a harm standpoint.
Well, the harm standpoint is to the recipient, the victim of the attacks from these devices. So you hear different stories. If I'm a hospital and I have a bunch of dialysis machines, they're very expensive, very, takes quite a while to get those replaced. So if somebody hacks those devices, compromises those devices, the hacker's game is really to say, look, can I blackmail the hospital and say, look, for a certain number of Bitcoin, you pay me, that's ransomware, and I'll release these devices back to you. That's a different game with the low-end devices. The low-end devices, it's not a victimless crime because the victims are really the e-commerce, the publishing sites. If I'm a hacker with a grudge to hold against any company out there, it doesn't take too many devices, probably a few thousand devices. If I get them all working in unison to launch a denial of service attack against that particular website, I can put somebody out of business very, very quickly. So that's where the risk to that we're seeing play out, and I've already started seeing those play out.
So for consumer smart objects, are there any software downloads that the original vendor can send that updates and gets rid of all this?
Great question. Going back to what we talked about earlier, a lot of these devices are being designed with just barely enough CPU, processor, memory, whatever resources, because they're trying to find that balance between, I want the function well, but I don't want to put so much cost into my bill of materials that increases the price that I have to charge, and therefore it makes it more expensive for somebody to come in and buy my product. So what you end up with is a situation where, in most cases, there is not enough resource, again, process, memory, chip, whatever, to run any kind of antivirus client on these devices. To top it off, the antivirus world, they aren't building antivirus clients or agents to run on these end devices. So A, you don't have the resource capacity. B, no one is designing any sort of client or agents for those devices. And C, even if you did, most users wouldn't have the ability or wherewithal to know what to do with an update, even if they got one, how to install it or what to do with it or how to manage it. That's why within the industry of IoT security, what people are really looking for is what's called an agentless security approach, where it doesn't involve running any kind of agent software on these devices, and you're able to discover the devices, profile the devices, control the devices without having to have any sort of direct software agent or client running on the actual device itself.
So do these basically all run through the server in a home?
Right. So what you see is most of these devices are either connecting through the Bluetooth, through the Wi-Fi or something to a home hub, a home router. It could be your in-home, whatever CP device that your ISP puts in there. Could be your cable box. It could be a little Wi-Fi router in the home that you've installed. So that's where all these devices are trying to connect to or through that router, hub, gateway to get out to the internet.
Well, can't the ISP, the cable company, the telco, put security in that box?
That's where now you're getting to what we do. That's where we come into play, is working with the carriers, working with the service providers and telcos and ISPs to actually put that type of security capability into that home hub, router, cable box, Wi-Fi, gateway, whatever you want to call it.
Why wouldn't they all have that?
You're going back to what we talked about earlier. Today, the market's not aware of the security risk, and the market isn't requiring their either device vendors or their telco or their cable company to implement that security.
But don't you think it would make sense that a Comcast type of company goes to a consumer and says, you want the safe version or the unsafe version?
And I think there will be some progressive, forward-thinking, sort of out-of-the-box thinkers, just like you described, that will say, hey, here's a way for us to get a market differentiator or market advantage, and then they'll be the market leaders. And then you'll have the folks that will follow in their footsteps and come up with a Me Too kind of offering.
So do you have any sense of, in a home, what's the weakest linked device?
Great question. We literally just posted a blog on that in the last day or two. So we see a lot of kids' toys in particular.
Really?
Video monitors. A lot of the low-end, low-price gadgets and widgets that people are buying and putting in their homes, and people have no idea what risks they pose. They might think, okay, I've got a refrigerator, I've spent $1,000 on it. Surely I'm going to have some type of protection on that. They might think about it. Once you get down to the price of a mid-priced flat screen TV, a monitor, thermostats, light bulbs, video monitors, the stuff you're buying for kids, security doesn't even occur to them that they should even be thinking about security.
So are appliances generally, I mean, LG and Samsung, they don't even sell appliances that are not connectable anymore. Are they, the bigger ticket items, are they coming pretty secure?
At this point in time, I would say no. I mean,
Wow.
very, very, very famous story of, a top-end refrigerator manufacturer at a recent Consumer Electronics show. Um, their devices, their refrigerators with the big flat screen TVs on the front of them had been hacked, and hacker was putting up, streaming video of porn. So here's all the folks walking by the booth at the trade show, and little Johnny and Susie are seeing porn on the refrigerator.
Wow, I missed that one.
Yeah.
So what's the big promise of IoT security, if there is one?
I think the promise is really, how do you close that security gap? Because it's going to be years and years before people really have a complete understanding of the security risk. I mean, look at the antivirus world on desktop PCs. That market is 20 years old, and yet every day you can pick up the paper, go to a website, and see about some new hack, some new compromise. So the IoT world, I don't think is going to be different. It's going to take years and years and years of trying to stay one step ahead, or play as quick a catch up as you can with the folks that are the black hatters, if you will.
In this world, do you view privacy as different than security?
Yes.
How?
Well, so again, with privacy, depending on what country you're in, what market you're in, privacy takes on all sorts of different connotations and why and what people are trying to protect. So the EU's privacy laws, GDPR, and the EU privacy laws are different than what is being promulgated here in the US. It's different than Australia, different than Japan. So it may be protecting the privacy, of my browser, my browser credentials, my personal, information, personal identity, and so forth. Which is in some cases there's overlap, but in many cases it's distinctly different and separate from security, which is how do you prevent people from gaining access to that information in the first place?
So how does the market deal with that? Is it different entities?
Yeah, I think we see, even within IoT and IoT security, there are many, many, many different market segments. Looking at smart home, looking at industrial controls, looking at enterprise, looking at telematics, looking at automotive, that are trying to address the unique characteristics of security. Privacy, again, it's not necessarily a game that we play. We don't deal with privacy, with personal ID kind of information. But the companies that are dealing with privacy and confidentiality kind of information, completely different part of the market.
What do you see for security around connected cars? Because you know what's coming there.
Yeah, that is another great question. Certainly, the risk of not having security with a vehicle is a lot different than not having security on a light bulb in your home. And the challenge there is some of those devices, like a car, is generating massive amounts of data, from all the different probes and sensors and AI and robotics on the car that are going up to the cloud that have to be managed and massaged and analyzed and so forth. Just tremendous amounts of data. So just capturing and managing that data is just an enormous challenge. Then you look at how do you deal with the security aspects. And again, there are so many different threat vectors and threat surfaces within a vehicle that it's just mind-boggling at this point in time. It's also, to a great extent, it's a challenge we're not addressing. We're really trying to deal with security gaps in the smart home, the business environment, the mid-sized and large business environment, and the telematics automotive is a game for companies other than us.
So do you think that'll be a big detractor for self-driving cars? It's basically getting on the road and self-driving?
I don't know that'll be a detractor initially. I think it's one of these things where it's going to take a series of incidents before people understand and recognize the risk involved in putting autonomous vehicles, on the road. Again, it's another area where there is such incredible technical innovation, technological innovation, applying AI, applying robotics, machine learning, and so forth. It's fascinating. If you're a technology geek, this is just an incredible time to be alive. But that comes with risks, and I don't know that we've, as a society, have thought through all those risks at this point in time.
So lastly, how does security evolve around IoT over the next couple of years?
I think one of the things that we've seen is, and that we are working on and trying to get our arms around, is it's not enough for me just to know what devices on my network are trusted and which ones are compromised. I need to find a way to share that information and collaborate to understand what are all the trusted devices and what are all the compromised devices on other networks around the world. So there's some governments trying to drive this, but I really think that it's going to require the private industry, the vendors, the device manufacturers, the security folks, to really figure out a way to collaborate and share information on these devices, the device profiles, the security profiles. We've been looking, for example, at blockchain. You have to squeeze in blockchain to every discussion you have anymore. Otherwise,
that and AI.
the buzzword bingo, right? And so there are some technologies out there, blockchain being one, that may provide a way of doing sort of a shared, a way to share and collaborate on trusted and compromised devices. So I think that will be a big part of where the industry needs to go over the next several years.
Thank you, Jeff Finn, and thank you all for listening to the Voices of the Internet of Things.